Welcome back to Media7. As we've noted, the dynastic backbone of News Corporation is one of the company's most striking characteristics. In The Source this week, Sam Mulgrew looks at who's who in the family.
The Murdoch dynasty isn't one to mess with. Mater familias 102-year-old Dame Elizabeth Murdoch is still kicking. A philanthropist with large holdings in the family business and with more than 70 living descendants, she's one powerful lady. Her late husband, Sir Keith Murdoch, a Gallipoli correspondent and Australian newspaperman, bequeathed the Adelaide News in 1953. It was to become 22-year-old Rupert Keith Murdoch's first success story. Now, at 80 years, Rupert has had 3 marriages, the second and longest to one of his cadet journalists, Scotswoman Anna Torv. Anna's 3 children have all played in the family business. 43-year-old Elizabeth is a television producer and sits on News Corp's board. Eldest son, 40-year-old Lachlan, who Rupert made publisher of the Australian newspaper at age 23, was heir apparent to the billions before resigning in 2005, leaving the only other Murdoch lad, 38-year-old James Murdoch, the first in line to power. Now, British investigators are sniffing at his toes. He's been a rap music financier, cartoonist, and he's controversially been CEO of Britain's B-Sky B and News Corp in Europe and Asia. Claims of nepotism have been denied. But there's a family feud if we're to believe elder sister Elizabeth. It's reported she said of her brother James and the ex-CEO of News International, Rebecca and James fucked the company. Ouch.
Sam Mulgrew there. I'm joined now by the publisher of the National Business Review, Barry Coleman, and the founder of interest.co.nz, Bernard Hickey. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Now, Barry, you've been in the news game a long time. It strikes me that in the age of WikiLeaks and data journalism, what's happened here is really an endorsement of old-fashioned journalistic values. Nick Davis at The Guardian just stayed on this story until it paid off. Yeah. Do you agree?
Yes. It's a tremendous tribute to him and old-fashioned reporting. You're dead right. He's like a dog with a bone, and he wouldn't let it go.
He wouldn't let it go even after the Press Complaints Commission in Britain told him to apologise to Rupert Murdoch.
It's amazing. It's an amazing story. That segment of it's amazing, isn't it? The irony of all this is that the Guardian people who've been attacking the Murdoch people incessantly, particularly over the cover-up, which we now know has occurred, is the newspaper that's running at a £33 million loss just last year. It's clocked up bills of over £160 million. So the righteous and the politically correct and the upper crust newspaper has doggedly tracked down the gutter press. The gutter press is making money, and the other ones, like the New York Times, and in grave danger of actually going out of business.
So are you saying here that good journalism is bad business? Well,
the funny thing is that the News of the World has more upper crust SE12 readers than the broadsheet papers do. So there's a little bit of stuff here about people don't want to buy News of the World, but in fact they all do, because some of the journalism is just really first class.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see where they go. I mean, what do you make of that, Bernard? Barry makes a good point. This is arguably the Guardian's finest hour, and yet it is losing 30 million quid a year with no prospect of that changing.
But its brand internationally has been massively increased by this, and it's one of the few newspapers in the world that's turned a local brand, a British brand, into an international one. And it's been one of the innovators online, at least, and one of the more profitable online. The areas where it's struggling is offline, and like many newspapers. That's why I think the closure of the News of the World, as Barry said, a very profitable, very strong newspaper, is so stunning for Murdoch. To shut that down, and it was a money-making paper, a big profit maker for Murdoch, shows the depth of the hit that Murdoch's own brand and own reputation has taken, that he would be prepared to shut down a profit-making machine like that.
What did you make of that call, Barry? Closing the News of the World, no one expected. I mean, you've shut down newspapers before, but they weren't making money.
Oh, beg your pardon.
The twin decision on the same day, shuts down News of the World, yeah, and thinks he can keep Rebecca Brooks in her job. What was he smoking?
Well, I sat up all last night and watched all 2.5, 3 hours of the the House questioning of Murdoch and James. And as part of that, one sort of perhaps slip of the tongue, they were talking about the decision to shut it, and it was James's decision. And he got the others to agree. Now, James, for better or worse, is a TV man. So the last person you want in charge of a really good newspapers is the TV people. So to him it wasn't such a big deal, I don't think, and he was the one who suggested it first as a way of climbing out of trouble. Murdoch never claimed to do it first, but they all said in front of the committee that they all agreed to it. So I think that was quite a very interesting point to come out of that, just a slip of the tongue on the side.
Barry makes a good point that Murdoch, who is a newspaper man to his bones, he's a reporter who, even in recent years, after coming back from a great meeting with some bigwig, phones through to the newsroom to report the story, to give the quotes.
There are multiple accounts of that. He'll go to a party, get the gossip and call his own newsroom.
But over the last 20 to 30 years, he has become distracted, some would say, involved so heavily in US television and pay television that perhaps he lost track of what was happening in his own newsrooms. And this decision by his son to shut is a sign of some of the stresses within News Corporation, not just the company, but the family itself.
Do you really believe he was as ignorant of what was going on as he claims? Are we really to believe that neither him nor James nor Rebekah Brooks knew what was going on?
I think he created the culture, but hasn't been able to monitor that culture. And that's the problem. Rebekah Brooks was able to continue on without an adult supervisor, if you like, when in fact James Murdoch was younger than her and hadn't been involved in the newspaper business. And this is where the problem with any dynastic succession. When you don't have someone who is an expert in that business, running that business, where you hand it on to the son or the daughter, then you create problems for yourself. And this is the problem for Murdoch. He's running a $60 billion company, but he can't control what's happening on the ground.
And I thought the extraordinary thing was that Bloomberg ran a story suggesting, some analysts suggesting that the company's trading at a 50% discount because Rupert Murdoch is the CEO.
If it was broken up and sold off, analysts estimate it could be worth $40 billion more without Murdoch in it. And that's because he's built up these amazing assets and a collection of assets, but he isn't really working them in the best way he can because there's only one of him and he's 80 years old.
I have to ask you to respond to that, because you're a fan, aren't you?
What he's guilty of is trusting people. And it's an amazing thing. He's got this young woman in her 30s. He puts her in charge of News of the World, the biggest Sunday paper in the world. And she is meant to be the editor. She's obviously as clueless. She wouldn't be an editor's backside, really, because here she is running this amazing newspaper, and she never asks the question about where did you get that great story from? Where did that scoop arrive? You'd know the reporter's just walking through a newsroom. Someone gets a big story, everyone wants to know, how did you get it? And I think that she never asked the basic questions. God knows what floor she was on, but she's in Gaga land, and then they sent it to the Sun. So she'll probably make that a mess if she hadn't been sacked anyway. So Murdoch had people in positions that he trusted, and I think that's been the big mistake that he's made.
And you believe that he was all sweetness and light, and he genuinely had no... I mean, they were making large payments to people who'd taken action against them.
Yeah, if you understand how these organisations work, it's a bit easier to understand how he might not know. I mean, first thing, he trusted the people there. But the second thing is that in these big corporations, people at different levels sign off cheques of different amounts. It's got to be huge to get upstairs. And so if you've got an editor who is telling someone, play your private eye man, £10,000 to hack in to see what Prince Charles is doing, that conceals the payment further up. Now, I suspect, because this happens all over Wall Street, not just Murdoch's papers, that there's just been a culture here for years and years and years and years where these payments are made down at this level. Because those payments have certainly gone on for a long time. People have paid policemen and ambulance drivers and firemen and celebrities for tips. The royal reporter, who was the most successful in London, paid the celebrity's masseur. So he heard all the gossip, and Murdoch never understood where he got the...
So there are things that have always been going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there are some problems right through the News Corporation empire along these lines. One thing that hasn't been reported much here is that in the United States there was a $500 million payout by one of Rupert Murdoch's a magazine inserting operations to a competitor after some pretty dodgy activities went on. And we obviously heard of the problems with the Melbourne Storm, where they regularly breached the salary cap. And I think Bruce Guthrie's point about a lack of process and a lack of some of the corporate governance that you sometimes have in a very large company like that has brought Murdoch down. He's running an $80 billion company like it's his company on its own. Very difficult to do when you're one man.
And the point you made too about the dynasty. If after watching this young chap James for 2.5 hours, there's no way that he should be in charge of a company that side. He had verbal diarrhea. Instead of a yes or no like his old man and getting to the point, he would answer a question basically saying he didn't know the answer to it, but he'd find out, and then he'd spend 5 more minutes explaining, going around the circle. So he said the same thing over and over and over again about how they found out about the crime at the end of a civil proceeding when that turned up the results. Now, he must have said that half a dozen times. He was like a broken record. So Murdoch came in, he looked like a humbled, emaciated old pensioner, shrivelled up and was putting his hand to his ear to hear. After a couple of hours of his son prattling on, the old man took over, and he's great. You can see the charisma of this man. He just told them straight. If he didn't know, he said he didn't know. He didn't burble on. The guy has just clearly, got that leadership material in him. And so I don't believe he did know, and I believe he's really upset at losing this big score video.
The stock shot up after that Commons Committee appearance. Yep. We do have to go, but quick yes or no answer. Will Rupert Murdoch still be CEO of News Corporation in a year's time?
Yes, as long as he's alive.
He's the fittest man on Wall Street physically. He'll definitely be in charge.
Well, that's a very optimistic view. Barry Coleman and Bernard Hickey, thank you. Thanks also to Bruce Guthrie and to you for watching. We're taking a break next week, but we'll be back on August the 4th with the Media7 Science Special, featuring Lord Robert Winston and Sir Peter Gluckman. If you'd like to join us for the Science Special recording the Sunday before that, contact details are on the screen now. But for now, goodbye.